This program, of course, is presented by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the most widely read, widely sold, and respected wrestling magazine in the world today.
This is Pro Wrestling Illustrated Podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, back once again with my co-host, Bryan Solomon. How's it going?
Very well, Al. Happy to be back with you once again.
Yes, a busy week. SummerSlam is this Saturday, one of the biggest WWE shows of the year, and I'd say kind of feels like it this year, certainly with big marquee matches really on top. You got a football stadium in Las Vegas. So I don't want to exaggerate too much, but almost a WrestleMania kind of feel. So we'll break down the card, really focusing on the key matches in just a moment. Also talk a bit about the passing of Bobby Eaton. I guess now it's been a couple of weeks. It's the first time we've had to talk since it happened, and kind of his wrestling legacy. CM Punk is, I guess we don't want to say too much, but the expectation certainly is that he is going to be debuting pretty soon for AEW. We'll talk about what that could mean for AEW, and not just Punk, but a lot of more moving pieces in recent weeks. That was pretty much the subject of the last podcast, and since then, many more dominoes have fallen. Ric Flair showing up at the AAA show in Mexico with his daughter in the front row, so lots going on. And later on, the person who is reporting a lot of this news for the first time, Dave Meltzer, the one and only. I've got an interview with him in the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and you were going to hear a portion of that interview, actually exclusive. We spoke for so long that only a portion of the interview got in the magazine. So what you're going to be hearing here later on this podcast is exclusive to the podcast, and we talk on all kinds of subjects: the release of Bray Wyatt, our thought of kind of how Bray Wyatt fits into the wrestling business, sort of the evolution of the wrestling business, and something Bryan, you and I have talked about, whether you start to feel like kind of left out, like, is this business left me behind with all the changes it's gone through? So I had that conversation with Dave, and just a lot of fun. Stay tuned for that. And as I mentioned, the hot seat interview is available in the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I got mine over the weekend. You get yours yet in your mailbox?
I did. I got it a couple days ago. Very excited to see it because I have my big, not that I only care about my own articles, of course, but I have my big Roman Reigns and The Rock cover story, which I pitched myself, and I'm super proud of on the cover there.
Yeah, we might see maybe some seeds planted, some more steps taken in that direction at SummerSlam. So as Bryan mentioned, the cover story looking at the iconic battle we must see, but when will we see it? The Rock and Roman. And also in here, we've got the 2021 PWI Readers Poll, looking at 50 questions involving the wrestling business. Me and Kristen put that together. As I mentioned, the hot seat with Dave Meltzer. We've got so much more in here, and the place to go is pwi-online.com to pick it up. And you know what? Just before the show, I went there, and it's got a completely new look. So if for nothing else, head over there to see our completely overhauled new website, and I think a lot more sort of user-friendly, a lot more features right here on the front page. We've got links to our YouTube channel, to the podcast, to back issues, some featured articles, featured story from the latest issue. So absolutely go to pwi-online.com, and whether you want to pick up the one issue or subscribe, you could save half off the cover price by doing that. If you go with the digital edition, you'll have it a lot quicker. We just got ours in the mailbox, a print issue, probably a little bit before it's on newsstands. But if you were a digital subscriber, you would have had it already for some time. So please go to pwi-online.com and check it out. While you're there, I think you could follow us also on social media. All our links to all our social media are here: Instagram, Twitter, @officialpwi, our YouTube, our Facebook. Links to where to pick up the Pro Wrestling Illustrated line of T-shirts at Pro Wrestling Tees and whatamaneuver.net. And so much more. So again, pwi-online.com is the place to go. You can also send us emails here at pwipodcast@outlook.com and pwi@kappapublishing.com. If it feels like I'm speeding through these, it's because I really want to get into the conversation. Lots to talk about. Brian, what were you saying?
No, I just want to say I love the new look of the website. I really truly do. I had been hoping for that for a long time. I mean, I love, 90s nostalgia as much as the next guy. But, website that's from the 90s, not so much. So right now it's awesome and amazing, and people should definitely check it out. It really looks cool.
Yeah, definitely more of a modern look. I know that this was a priority for Kevin when he came over as our editor-in-chief last year. And yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot more sort of user-friendly, a lot more modern. So
I was thinking about that Rock and Roman cover story, and it's funny. I'm looking at it and leading into SummerSlam, and I could almost hear like Vince McMahon screaming in my ear, because one of his things was always like, I've got this big Roman Reigns and Cena match that we're trying to push, and you're about the Rock. You're killing me here, man. This match, I don't even know when this is going to happen, and blah blah blah. that would be like the voice in my head, like, why are we pushing the Rock right now? It's all about Cena, And then I have to remind myself, oh wait, I'm not at WWE magazine. I do what I want to do. Okay, yeah.
Do you catch yourself sometimes still using or not using certain words that were prohibited in WWE? Belt, wrestling, all that stuff.
I don't do that, although I know people that used to work there that still write about wrestling. But what I do, which I always have to stop myself, is I sometimes will still be in the mode of like being the shill, there's a difference between like being a wrestling writer and being like a shameless shill. Like I can talk about how I'm excited for Roman and Rock, but like if I was at WWE, I would have to be talking about how it was the most anticipated match in the history of the business and the greatest match of all time and the two greatest superstars in WWE hit, like all that kind of stuff. And sometimes I have to break myself out of that to be a little more like, obviously, wrestling is illusion and we're having fun, but to not be like I'm trying to sell something. You know what I mean? It's a little different. That's what I have to try not to do a lot of times.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, when dealing with WWE, I will still. It's almost just to kind of avoid the hassle of like being corrected. I'll say superstars and stuff like that, and sometimes I almost feel dirty saying, but it's like, all right, I'll speak your language.
I do sometimes feel a little weird writing wrestler, because that was something that was beaten out of me. The other thing that I enjoy doing almost spitefully is that I can type the letters WWF when it's relevant to the story.
Yeah.
Or WWWF, because as anybody knows, if you look at WWE stuff, even historically they will always say WWE, on anything new, because of the World Wildlife Fund. So I had to deal with that for so many years of like, calling, Bob Backlund a former WWE champion, and it always felt weird to me. But so now my rule is always I will use the letters that were relevant at the time that something took place.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I follow. It's probably worth a conversation with Kevin about what style is on that, the official PWI style on that. But I think that's kind of what makes sense. Call it the WWF when it was the WWF.
Right.
But when you get into like those early 2000s, you sort of forget, like, all right, when did it? So what was it? 2003?
It was March 2002.
Okay, so I'm a year off. Yeah,
I can tell you, because that was right when I got my first magazine that they let me edit from top to bottom, and I was so angry because it was the first magazine that didn't have the name WWF in it. And at the time, we're so used to it now. But at the time, it felt so wrong. It was like it was like changing the name of like Coca-Cola or something. It just sounded terrible. Yeah. And I remember like I was in a state of denial. I was like, no, I'm putting WWF in here. I don't care. If Vince doesn't like it, he could tell me to my face to take it out. Like I was really mad about it. They had to talk me off the ledge.
I remember that. Yeah, I don't know. That's still. I mean, I guess you just get used to it. But at the time, I remember just thinking it sounds so kind of like wussy wee,
Well, someone else, a lot of people were saying that, like WWF, it sounds official.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the other thing too, what I didn't like about it, but again, now it's like whatever, that ship has sailed. The corporate name of the company, they had already gotten rid of Titan Sports. So the corporate name of the company was WWF Entertainment. That was like what the stock was called. And so when they changed the name, they just got rid of the F. And I felt like that was completely giving up even the pretense that you're trying to pretend this is like a sports league or like a body of like a governing body. You're basically just admitting that this is just an entertainment company. It's like Disney or something,
I did think the whole campaign, "Get the F out," was brilliant. I mean, I
know the guy who came up with it. His name's Mike Foley. I want to give him a shout out. I don't know if he's listening. He does not get the credit he deserves. He was in creative services. And he's also the guy that invented the Raw Deal card game, if people remember that.
Mm-hmm.
But he came up with that, "Get the F out." He said it in a meeting, and everybody was floored. And they were like, "That's what we're going with. That's what we're going to do. That's how we're going to sell it. Get the F out."
Yeah, that's
great.
It
was the best thing about it.
Yeah, whenever I think about that, and not knowing that, I always thought, I bet you that was mentioned at a meeting, and that guy got like a standing ovation.
It was. You're totally right.
Yeah, it's that kind of moment. Yeah. Anyhow, let's talk about something. Unfortunately, less happy, the passing of Bobby Eaton. We got word, I guess, a couple weeks ago now. And it's interesting, not long ago we were talking about Paul Orndorff, and when you get one of these really notable wrestling deaths, it's certainly worth discussing. But Bobby Eaton, a Paul Orndorff or like a King Kong Bundy, that kind of guy, when he dies, because they were part of that 80s rock and wrestling era. You see some mainstream news. Eaton is certainly not that kind of guy, but among wrestling fans, the reaction was overwhelming. And he is one of those guys that, unless you really are a wrestling fan and a certain kind of wrestling fan to a certain level, you might not get it. He's the kind of guy that, if I showed a picture to one of my brothers or friends who's not a wrestling fan of this guy, sort of pudgy, bad mullet, very pale, they wouldn't get it at all. But if you lived through Bobby Eaton and you saw his work, why wrestlers in particular held him in such high regard. I mean, he really was kind of the gold standard of certainly work in the ring. What are your memories of Bobby Eaton?
Well, I mean, it goes without saying, how he's best remembered and best known is he was the heart and soul of what I would call, still, my opinion, the greatest working tag team of all time, which was the Midnight Express. And you could almost go with either of the incarnations he was in, the Dennis Condrey version or the Stan Lane version. I'm a little partial to the Stan Lane version.
Yeah,
but he was like the glue that held it together, and he also did amazing stuff. Like, you can look up singles matches he had with Ric Flair. I mean, there's one that's floating around on YouTube from 1990 where it's like, it is the level that you would expect from a Ric Flair NWA world title match. And he is more than holding his own. And I mean, like you said, he to look at him or to hear him and everything, you would think, like, what's the big deal? Specifically because, look, no one would disagree with this. Even Jim Cornette himself, who was his manager and closest friend for many years, said he was not WWF material. He was not the kind of guy that Vince would look at and go, this guy's a star. He didn't have the look that was needed at that time. He couldn't really talk. But when the bell rang, that's the thing. Like, he was one of the greatest of all time. And if people think that's ridiculous, like, watch some of his stuff. People have said this. I'm not the only person to say it. But when you watch his stuff, not only does it hold up, you could totally see him hanging today with the best of them. Like, he was that good. The crispness of everything he did, the speed of it, especially for the time, the selling, everything. It was like he was like some kind of a savant. Like, you look at him and go, like, who is this guy? And then the bell rings and it's like you're watching one of the greatest matches you've ever seen, and he's the main reason why.
Yeah. That era you talked about, 1990, that's kind of when I first started seeing a Bobby Eaton, because growing up in New York and WWF territory, not having cable, I was a WWF fan. I was, not really a Hulkamaniac, but you grew up on the WWF brand of wrestling where, with few exceptions, work rate was not a priority. It was about the characters and the storylines and all of that. And so when I first started watching, WCW was around 1990, and kind of around, I guess it was more 91, when he started getting his singles push. And I mean, it might be the first Bobby Eaton match I saw around there was when he won the TV title. But I remember, again, even not being familiar with kind of what a good wrestling match was as a little kid, recognizing that when Bobby Eaton was in the ring, something was happening. It was better. You were going to be more entertained bell to bell than almost anything else. And I remember that match against Flair, and knowing Flair was a legend, and again, seeing this kind of like pudgy mullet guy, and thinking, wow, like that was a match. And, you know, and it's hard to put your finger on it. I mean, certainly one thing, he was great with the aerial stuff. I remember being blown away by the Alabama Jam, when, you know, aerial wrestling was nothing, obviously, like what it is today. But the other thing that you really hear from him, and I've watched a lot of in the last couple of weeks and just passing, kind of with an observant eye, is his selling, right? I mean, he was just a terrific seller in wrestling.
And it's so interesting because it really convinces you that some people are just born with this stuff. You know, it's like there were times where they tried to sort of recruit him as a trainer. I think he was even brought to NXT briefly, and Cornette would try to use him in OVW. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. And it never quite worked out because he could not explain it. You know, he could just do it. He was a very unassuming guy. I met him one time at the last Brian Pillman Memorial Show in 2001. Very quiet, exactly what you'd expect. Like, you know, you would never think that this guy had all this incredible skill. He just knew how to do it. And if you asked him to explain it, he would have a hard time explaining it because he just knew. Like he didn't even he did not train heavily. Like, this is a known fact. He wasn't a guy who was constantly in the gym. He had good conditioning, obviously, but he wasn't like pumping weights and things. He really wasn't. And he wasn't, you know, even his training. If you read about how he broke into the business, like he started out in Tennessee setting up the ring for Nick Goulas in the Nashville area just as a teenage fan. And they would see him in the ring, like playing around with his friends as a teenager and be like, oh my God, this guy, we need to put this kid on TV. Like we need to like maybe smarten him up a little bit and put him on TV. Like he was just naturally good without needing to be taught almost anything. And that's almost literally true. It's really incredible. And like you said, too, even the later WCW stuff, he made a great tag team with Arn Anderson. They were amazing. Sure. And I know,
Dangerous Alliance. Yeah, it's part of the whole Dangerous
Alliance.
Great work there. Yeah.
He even had, I mean, you know, it's tough now, but he had a great tag team with Chris Benoit for a little while. Mm-hmm. He had a great tag team, of course, with Lord Steven Regal. That was really push the Blue Bloods, even there. And even the later guys like Regal and even Goldberg, they respected him so much in WCW because he was there for about 15 years, from the Crockett days into the WCW days. Like Cornette and Condrey and Lane were long gone, and he was still there. And you had these new era WCW guys, even they were asking to work with him. There was a story going around that Goldberg wanted him to end his streak.
No.
They shot it down, but Goldberg wanted that because he respected him so much, and he thought it would really help him out because he wanted to like help him get a push. And they were like, no, we can't really do that with, you know, we're not really doing anything with him, but he wanted it.
Yeah. I was looking up some of his latter stuff and I'd say unfortunately, but also understandably, where he was at that point. He was the guy who would be brought in to help get new guys over. I saw a match on YouTube with him and the Kiss Demon, which was, you know, essentially a 3-minute squash. That's kind of where he was at that point. And again, I guess it's sort of understandable. But, you know, I think a lot is made of his limitations. And I think they were real in terms of aesthetics and all that. But you mentioned the Blue Bloods and the angle with Regal, and I was watching some of the skits building up to that. And it was one of the times where he was kind of called on to do sort of the sports entertainment thing. And I thought he was great. I thought he like totally got it, and he had a certain role to play there and had to hit a certain tone. And it was kind of like this aw shucks kind of hillbilly. It was a My Fair Lady, essentially, with Bobby Eaton. And I thought he hit it out of the park. I thought he was so good in that.
Yeah, because they played to his strength. It was like it didn't require him to do something that he wouldn't be comfortable doing, and it partly worked well, because you could tell Regal was having so much fun. And I know, like, Regal, he's another one who had specifically requested to work with him because he knew how much he could learn from him. Like, that's who he was. And another thing to say too, like, especially about the Midnight Express and how he always made everything work. Everybody remembers, their matches with the Rock and Roll Express. That's what they're the most remembered for. But I mean, they could work with almost anybody. Like, I remember I recently rewatched one of the early Starcades. I think it was either 84 or 85. I think it was 85 because that's when they were there. And it was Midnight Express, Condrey and Eaton versus Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant, who is not known to be the greatest worker, right? And his tag team partner was Miss Atlanta Lively, who is Ronnie Garvin in drag, if anybody remembers, right? Ronnie Garvin in a dress and a wig. And I am telling you, if you don't believe me, go and find it. It's on Peacock. It's one of the best tag team matches you will ever see. And Bobby Eaton is a big reason why. Like, it's crazy how good a match like that was. And it shows how they really could have a great match with anybody. They were like the tag team version of Ric Flair.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And, unfortunately, a few weeks before that, he lost his wife. So certainly a very hard time for his family and people who knew him and loved him. And we send our condolences. And absolutely go on Peacock if you get to work and just dig around and find Bobby Eaton stuff. Certainly on YouTube, too. And you won't be disappointed. Let's talk a little bit about SummerSlam coming up this Saturday. Again, what is supposed to be one of the biggest shows of the years. A lot of years it hasn't felt that way. This year, at least at the very top, they really loaded it up with a marquee match that I'd say is bigger even than what they offered at WrestleMania this year. When you're talking about the return of John Cena, who is now a huge movie star. Have you seen Suicide Squad?
I did. My wife and I just watched it a couple days ago.
I really liked it, and DC movies typically are pretty terrible. I thought this was the best of the bunch, and I thought Cena was great in it.
Yeah, he, I liked the movie. I didn't love it. I don't want to turn it into a movie review podcast, but I had my issues with it. But Cena was not one of them. I actually thought he was one of the best things in it. I thought his character was so cool because he kind of walked the line between good and bad, and like you like him for a while and then you don't like him anymore. Like it's almost like a wrestling angle, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but like he does this interesting twist that he was really good. He's no Dwayne Johnson, but he's good.
It's clearly a really kind of top heavy show. I'll go through the card as we know it now. A lot of it was put together last night on Raw. So Alexa Bliss and Eva Marie was thrown together. That's kind of an odd one. AJ Styles and Omos versus Orton and Riddle. I think there's an appetite for that. I think Orton and Riddle have gotten over pretty well as a tag team, and fans are into them. Drew McIntyre versus Jinder Mahal. Kind of a weird, it should mean more because they are two former WWE champions. But it just doesn't feel like a whole lot, but you give them credit for building it over the last few weeks. Sheamus and Damian Priest, Usos and Mysterios for the tag title, Edge and Seth Rollins, which is a big match. Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks, I guess we'll see. That one seems to be kind of up in the air with both of them missing a few shows over the last few weeks, and I don't think there's been much of a public explanation, but I think people are putting two and two together in a pandemic and kind of figuring out what might be going on at least. And then the two world title matches, Bobby Lashley and Goldberg. And, of course, John Cena, and I'm sorry, I missed one, Nikki Ash versus Charlotte Flair versus Rhea Ripley. And then Cena versus Reigns. Let's spend a little time talking about Cena versus Reigns. Chatting a little bit before we went on, it looks like we have kind of different viewpoints about the buildup of this match. I've liked the mic work. I thought on Friday night, Cena and Reigns felt organic. but real. Listening to some of the Jeff Jarrett podcasts in recent weeks, and they've been kind of talking about WCW, early 2000s WCW, and the garbage that Vince Russo was doing, trying to create like these work shoots. Yeah. And it almost never works, or you could say never works, but I think this works, because they've been able to ride that line between the show, the performance aspect of pro wrestling, and then kind of I wasn't crazy about the Nikki Bella stuff, but I thought both of them were touching a nerve with the other one. I don't believe that they necessarily really think that, but I think they put together promos that you could believe that they really think, and I really liked it.
I'll preface it by saying that I have liked the stuff they've been doing on the mic. I think they're both really good at it. This is a reminder of how good John Cena is. He doesn't always get enough credit for that. I think you've said that before, where it's like, he's one of the great promo guys. And, he showed it again. I don't know how much of it was sort of like bullet points or how heavily scripted, but it did seem like they were just building on each other. Like, oh, I'm going to think of something that's going to get this guy and really get him. I loved the thing about this, bars of soap for teeth. Because I've been thinking that came back. So I'm glad he did that. But I will say, and it's a big one for me, is I felt, and this is what I think we were talking about, is I feel like I needed something more than just these great promos. And I go back and forth on this because I understand where some people come from, where they're like, if you have this kind of star power in a match, that sells itself. You don't need to have like an overproduced angle or storyline or something, something like the Mega Powers, with Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, where they're two massive stars, but they had a beef, they had an angle. I feel like this needed something. I don't know about something at that level, but some kind of personal issue between the two of them without it coming across as hokey that just would give it a little more heat. And I don't quite know what, but something more than just throwing insults at each other about like who's better than whom and like who's the bigger icon or whatever. I feel like that gets done a lot, and it feels lazy to me when they do that. They're like, we have these two giant names. Let's just put them in a ring and be like, wow, could you believe these two guys are in a ring together? Like, I need a little more. And I don't know what. People were asking me, like, how would you do it? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a million different things. I don't get paid to write for them. But I know, like, off the top of my head, I don't know, Seth Rollins' name got dropped to big effect in that promo, right? Imagine if he somehow became a part of this. Like, maybe he takes Roman's side. And it's almost like a semi-shield thing. Maybe he goes on Cena's side, and there's just something brewing that feels more than just talking. And I know like Cena's involvement is limited, and I don't expect him to have like a bunch of matches. And I certainly wouldn't want them to have a match before SummerSlam. I think that spoils it. But there's got to be something. I mean, I don't know. Have Paul Heyman like sabotage his next movie deal. I don't know. Something. There's to be something where you're like, oh, these guys really want to get at each other, and I'm not feeling that right now.
I really totally disagree with you more than usual, because I feel like the inclination is what you're describing, and WWE actually does that more than they don't. And I think about the other matches that over the years that have been, and you write about a lot of them in the new magazine, like kind of these iconic generational clashes. And I think at times their inclination has been to add something to the mix, and it's felt unnecessary. I think back to The Rock and Hogan. And I think what people remember for the buildup of that match was that, that showdown face to face on Raw, where, how about one more WrestleMania match against The Rock brother or whatever. And that, to me, was, I don't want to say all you need, but I think that was the foundation, the core of this epic match. What they didn't need was Hogan driving a truck into the, what was it? I remember a car crash backstage, and I feel like that's usually the go-to. It's like, well, why don't we throw a car crash in there? Or another one that comes to mind was The Rock and Austin at WrestleMania 17, right? This was, I think, the best of the three matches, the best WrestleMania ever. And they actually ended up abandoning this. But if you remember, for weeks, it was about Deborah. And it was almost like this love triangle with the Rock and Austin's wife at the time, Deborah. It felt unnecessary. They seemed to kind of become aware of that, and they pulled it, and yet you didn't need it. And I think when you are dealing with kind of like these generational clashes of the greatest of one era versus the greatest of the other era, I do think it needs to be about legacies. And that doesn't mean you can't have an angle, you can't have an attack, something like that. But not only do I think it's enough to leave it about legacies, but I actually think adding too much to it waters it down, because then it just becomes kind of another WWE main event. I mean, your idea to get Seth Rollins involved, to me that almost lowers it a level, because then it's just kind of standard WWE fare, something that Seth Rollins. Now, that's not to say that everything they've done is a home run, but I like that, John Cena's view is, I left here, they kind of gave the keys to Roman Reigns, and he's crapped the bed. Now, you could argue whether, WWE should be out there saying that, and whether it's good business to be saying that, but it's true. Certainly before Reigns turned heel, it didn't work. It was an experiment that failed. And I like Reigns really saying, I really like this a lot, putting over Cena huge, saying, I could come out here and trash talk you, but no, you're one of the greatest of all time. And that's what a good heel does, right? Because then when you beat him, you didn't just beat a scrub, you beat one of the greatest of all time. But I also like Reigns kind of make, maybe they've taken it, one joke too many about the missionary stuff, but the idea that Cena is bland, kind of old news, overstayed his welcome. I don't have much to criticize at all about the buildup to this.
Yeah, and I did say I kind of go back and forth on this. So I do want to. That's one of the things I hesitate, because I'm not looking for like I said, like something that's really going to seem like really corny and unnecessary, and I understand that. I don't think, and I'm just having a hard time putting my finger on it. I just wish it was something more than just promos. I don't know what. And I don't necessarily need one to be having an affair with the other's wife or anything like that, but yeah. But something that would just make it a little more heated. Like, it feels too much like they're just, what it is? They're trying to prove something. I mean, the characters, but they don't really seem to hate each other. Like, they're just trying to prove who's better. And maybe I've just been too conditioned and trained by WWE booking to feel like that's not quite enough. And I know they've done it before, yeah, you're right. This feels very much to me like what happened with Rock and Cena, where it was very similar, where it was, we're going to get in the ring and make fun of each other and get the crowd to laugh at how we're insulting each other. And maybe it's because I feel like, well, they did that already. And The Rock, they did it already. And Cena was one of the guys doing it then. So I don't know. That's one of the reasons why I was hoping for something just slightly different. Again, not cornball, not like overproduced WWE kind of stuff necessarily, but something that makes me think that they really don't like each other. I do like the insults they've been throwing at each other, even the Nikki Bella stuff, because it does give me that impression. Like, it makes you sort of think, wow, I wonder if these guys really do have a thing. Like, that happened with Rock and Cena too. If you remember way back when, like, he called The Rock out for having notes written on his hand.
Yeah.
The Rock was legit pissed off at that. Yeah. And it does make you think, I guess there is a little bit of a little personal contest going on here. I like that.
Do you have any reason to believe, and I'm just thinking about this because you mentioned Rock and Cena, and there was no love lost there, right? I mean, there was no secret. Those two guys at one time really didn't like each other. But do you have any reason to think that any of that exists between Roman Reigns and John Cena?
I mean, I could be drawing a blank. I've never really heard anything to indicate that. I mean, other than the usual kind of like people jockeying for spots and for positions. And I mean, one thing about Cena is that he was kind of known. And again, look, I mean, I didn't see things with my own eyes, but he had that reputation for being the kind of person that was friendly to your face and then kind of politicking behind the scenes in a way that, fans necessarily wouldn't expect from him because he comes across so likable. That has been said about him. I mean, it's possible that Roman Reigns was a victim of that, but I tend to doubt it because they seem to be like at the time that Reigns was on the ascendancy, Cena was really kind of on the way out. Like Cena was no longer the go-to main event guy every time out by the time that Reigns was getting that push. So I don't know. I'm guessing this is more just them trying to replicate that Rock Cena heat without it necessarily actually existing.
Yeah. What do you think of the tactic? You don't see this a lot, but Cena's promo on Friday night, basically the crux of it was, yes, I'm going to sell for you the whole match. You're going to beat the crap out of me, but I'm going to get the pinfall. And it's interesting because so much, wrestling and combat sports, typically at its best is sold by the notion of wanting one guy to beat up the other guy. Right? When I get my hands on you, I'm just going to tear you apart. And if anything, a lot of times the message, certainly from a babyface, is even if I lose, you're going to leave there really hurt and damaged. And this was kind of the opposite of Cena sort of like conceding. You're going to beat the crap out of me, but I'm going to get the pinfall. Do you think that's? What do you think of that as a tactic to sell a match?
It was clever because I think there's two ways to really read that, right? There's the inside way, and there's the way that an average fan might read it. And my initial takeaway from it, which was his way of saying, obviously this is going to be an even back and forth match. We all know that. No one thinks I'm going to squash you. Like, you are going to beat the crap out of me, but I'm still going to win. You know what I mean? Like, I took it at that level. Like, yeah, I'm going to take everything you have. I'm going to take the Superman punch. I'm going to take the spear, and I'm still going to come back and win. Like, I feel like you can read it that way. It doesn't necessarily have to be, although I think it's there for the people that are, kind of smart enough to be like him saying, well, yeah, I'm going to sell for you and I'm going to bump for you, but we all know who's going to go over, without really saying that. I don't think it was harmful because I do think there's the other way to take it. And I was also thinking, too, about the situations where there's real beef, like with Rock. I think you also felt it with Cena and Punk, that there was something real there. Like some of those promos that he cut was really to the heart of the matter when they were feuding, of like, you are a locker room, cancer kind of a thing.
Yeah.
What Punk was leveling at him, and it felt very real. Like that's another one where I feel like they're trying to get a little bit of that juice going, But again, it's interesting because you have Cena saying, yeah, you're going to beat the crap out of me, but I'm still going to win. I guess it's a way to sort of make Cena or kind of put over Reigns, but it is weird if you're thinking, as I'm thinking, although it's certainly not a lock, that Reigns is probably going to win. Then it does seem like a weird way to sell it. You know what I mean? Like to have Cena lose like that. I don't know. It just seems a little bit backwards to me.
We might have talked about this on the last episode, but I think it's worth bringing up. Do you think it's possible, or even likely, that because Ric Flair is now left the company, this almost becomes their last shot at beating that record, right? And for what it is, WWE kind of like fabricated the record anyway, because the real count of world titles, I think, is you could argue is several more than that. But 16-time world champion, that's sort of officially what's recognized. Flair now on the outs in WWE, and Cena tied at 16 times. Not a guy who's going to, has wrestled much over the last several years. Certainly not for the world title, and who knows how many opportunities you're going to have in the future to feature him in a main event against the world title. Does that change things a lot? I mean, if it was assumed, as I think most people would assume, that Reigns was going to win the title, do they maybe now reconsider and say, look, here's our chance to make him 17. He can go and drop it right back to Roman Reigns next month, but Ric Flair's not building on that 16.
I think there's more of a chance of that happening now than there was before Flair left. I will say that. I still don't think it's going to happen, or at least I think it would be really poor judgment, because I feel like this goes without saying, it's a very petty thing to do for little reward. Like, Reigns is really strong right now. He's as over as he's ever been. He's an incredible heel, but he's not untouchable. And I think having something like that happen could weaken him, and it could get him back into the spot where he's in like the, oh, get this guy off my TV kind of deal. Like he could slip back into that, and he's made so much progress. And I think if Cena humiliates him, you run the risk of really weakening him. And I really hope they don't do that for a stupid petty thing. And I just want to say too, on the Flair front, because I'm a huge Flair fan, and I once interviewed him about all the world titles. The count of those world titles, it's not really WWE's doing. So that started in WCW, actually, where they recognized him at the time he left the company. He was called a 7-time World Heavyweight Champion because he had officially won the NWA and WCW title 7 times that they recognized. There were a couple of like house shows overseas that they never recognized. So he went to WWE. He won 2 more, right? He came back, and they started calling him 9-time. And then they started adding on that every time he would regain the WCW title, and that's how they got to 16. So, I mean, like, it's not really something WWE made up. He already was being called that. And the titles that are extra, because it's probably something like 22, I know Meltzer says a lot, are things that happen, you know, in kind of like on the other side of the planet or in third world countries because they wanted to avoid a riot, and then they never mentioned it on TV. So, I mean, the 16 number is pretty damn reliable. Just want to say that as a footnote because I'm a big Flair fan. So
I wonder if they I mean, this would be petty kind of in the opposite direction, but if they do go and put the title on Cena and make him the 17-time world champion, does Flair stop kind of acknowledging that it was 16 and start saying, no, I was whatever, 22-time world champion?
He might. I mean, they've never, mentioned that before officially on TV, like that, he won one in New Zealand from Harley Race. He had one in, he had to drop the title in Puerto Rico or Trinidad, I think, in an unscripted finish because they were going to, riot. And there were other little things like the Midnight Rider when Dusty Rhodes had the mask on and they wouldn't let him keep the belt because he was wearing a mask. Like all these weird little footnotes, and then the belt would be returned to Flair. Like if you really wanted to include all of those, yeah, you could probably get it up into the low 20s, but it's never been officially done in WCW or WWE. They have never acknowledged those extra ones.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned Flair, you mentioned CM Punk. I mean, 2 guys in the news a lot over the last few weeks with rumors of both potentially showing up in AEW sooner than later. Ric Flair, why don't you talk about what happened over the weekend with Ric Flair at AAA?
Yeah, so I watched Triple Mania, right, which is sort of the AAA's biggest show of the year, and I watched it after the fact because I had heard so many interesting things coming out of it, like they had a Marvel Comics themed trios match. I felt like I had to see that. You had Deonna Purrazzo on there, and I was interested. But the main thing I'd heard was you had Andrade and Kenny Omega in the main event, and that Ric Flair showed up unannounced in Andrade's corner. And I didn't even realize this until later. I guess I'm a little slow on the uptake, but people were pointing out that Charlotte was in the front row for the show, like cheering on her husband or her fiance and her father. And they took pictures backstage and everything. It was a really bold thing for her to do. But it also indicated to me more than ever that Flair's got to be AEW bound. I mean, he's just got to be. I mean, they had him, for those that saw it, the visual, you had Ric Flair and Kenny Omega sharing a ring. I mean, that's a huge deal. You had Ric Flair and Kenny Omega trading chops with each other. And even at 72 for Flair, that's still a big deal. I mean, it's just, and you had 2, AAA, it may have been AAA, but you had 2 contracted AEW talents wrestling for the world title and Flair involved. It almost felt to me like it was a prelude. Like, I don't know what Flair's non-compete is or what it is, but I have a feeling like, for example, it probably didn't include appearances, outside of the United States. I mean, maybe that's how he was able to appear on TV for them, or maybe it was because it was not a non-wrestling appearance. But for whatever reason, maybe he's in hot water with WWE. Who knows? But he did it, and it was a big deal. I believe somebody said it was, believe it or not, in all this time, the first time that Flair had ever appeared for a Mexican wrestling promotion, for a Lucha Libre promotion. He had never wrestled for AAA or CMLL ever. So
wow, it's hard to believe. Wow.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. What could and again, maybe jumping the gun, but all signs are pointing in that direction. What could a Ric Flair mean to AEW? I mean, what's the right role for him? And of all the proven TV ratings, draws, different makers, Ric Flair's right there at the top. Do you think even at this age and stage of his career, he could be a difference maker?
I think that I do. And I mean, he's not wrestling anymore. He's not going to be a difference maker in the way that CM Punk or Daniel Bryan will be difference makers, or even or any kind of somebody that's going to be wrestling. But I think AEW is a company that treats the so-called, legends of wrestling better than WWE. And I think for someone like Flair, in terms of how he's going to be presented, I think it's a better place for him to be. I really do. If you look at what they've done with people like Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, for example, and Jake the Snake Roberts, I mean, taking them seriously, giving them important roles, not having them be clowns. You're not having them go over your top stars. You're not doing that kind of stuff, but you're taking them seriously. You're showing the new talent, being reverential towards them. That's the kind of thing that Flair needs, because, to a lot of the younger generation, he just became this kind of clown that WWE made him into, unfortunately. And I say that as someone who really considers him to be the greatest of the modern era. And I think if over there, I think you'd see him reinvigorated again. I'm sure they would really let him cut loose in terms of promos and really being the Ric Flair that we know and love. I would love to see him reunite with, Arn and Tully. You don't need me to say that. I mean, that would be incredible and so much fun to see that. And so I think partly because I guess to Vince, he'll never really truly be a WWE guy. Like, he never got that treatment as a legend in WWE, at least in my opinion, not to the level that he needed to be. And in general, it's not just a Flair problem. It's the way that they treat their legends. Like 99% of them are just treated like jokes. They trot them out. They have them get beat up. They have them get emasculated and just sort of laughed at. And or it gets turned into like a circus sideshow with, Doink running around and the gobbledygooker. Like, that's basically the way they look at wrestling. And I think Flair deserves better than that. So I think he's going to get it there.
Do you like him in the role of working with Andrade? I mean, I don't know if that would be. That mean, pushing Chavo to the side. It sounds like they've tried different people, right? So they had Vicky Guerrero at first, and then they shifted over to Chavo. Do you like Flair in that role? Is that something that makes sense?
Well, he's never really been much in terms of a wrestling manager before. I mean, a little bit here and there. He worked with Miz and stuff. But I do think he would fit well in a role like that. Obviously, Andrade needs somebody to talk for him. That I think I don't want that to hurt him in the way that I really truly feel like it hurt Asuka. I feel like once she opened her mouth, it just became very, very hard to, especially in the WWE system, to make her seem as intimidating as she had seemed before. And I don't want that to happen with Andrade. And so I think Flair could pull that off. He's completely comfortable talking, as we all know. I mean, I think he could fill that role. I think there's so many things he could do. You could have him teamed up with almost anybody. I mean, could you imagine, him with Jericho or him with, he could even take Don Callis's place with Moxley.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
I mean, not with Moxley, with Omega. That would be incredible,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The other guy, obviously, that everybody's talking about joining and could be, by the time you're listening to this, it's happened. CM Punk, he hasn't denied it. I believe they're in Chicago on Friday. The expectation is that he's going to be in some kind of program with Darby Allin, who's essentially kind of been calling him out. In 2021, CM Punk in his 40s now, off of TV for what's it been, 7 years. I expect a lot of people will tune in to see it, but where's your confidence level in him being a big player, a difference maker, and what is the right role for him in 2021?
My confidence level is very high for this, honestly. I think, unlike some of these guys that are really over the hill and they'll bring them back and try to get something going, I feel like even at his age, he can very easily be thrown right into the mix, and people would buy it and people would love it. Him coming back, I don't know how long it goes for, but I mean, like, him coming back is sort of like when Hogan came back in 2001 to WWE. Like, yeah, he wasn't a kid anymore, but he had enough in the tank, and he was still as recognized and revered by fans that you could do a lot with him for at least a few years. And I think Punk has even more of an upside than that. I really do. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm pretty sure he's younger. He's a few years younger than Hogan was at that time. And, he's been gone for so long, which somehow in a weird way makes him fresh again. He's not overexposed like everybody else. He's never left the consciousness of fans. It's like you still hear his name getting chanted. And I think people are really, really, really ready for it. I think if you waited a couple more years, then you would get to the point where the majority of the audience may not even know who he was anymore. As crazy as that sounds, the way that the fan membership turns over. But I feel like we're not there yet, and this is the time to really strike. And I think he's going to really be a difference maker.
I have some concerns and questions about CM Punk, and I don't want to say proven wrong because I haven't drawn any conclusions, but I hope he answers them in the affirmative. One thing is, where is his? This is different than Daniel Bryan, who wanted out of WWE, or so the story goes, because he so much loves wrestling and wants to contribute and wants to work with all these different opponents that he's never worked with, and is hungry to get in there. And I feel like the narrative with CM Punk is that he essentially had to be dragged kicking and screaming to come back to wrestling. And for all these years, everybody's kind of tried to woo him, and this is him sort of. And again, we could be completely, or I could be proven completely wrong, but it feels like this is him sort of saying, all right, I'll come and wrestle for you. And if that's the attitude, I mean, I don't know where the commitment is this. I feel like CM Punk has spent the last 7 years distancing himself from wrestling, and I don't want to say trashing it, but also sort of undercutting the significance of it in his life. I mean, I think when we've heard him talk in the last 7 years, what you hear so much from him is, I don't want to talk about wrestling. I'm not interested in wrestling. Let's, talk about hockey or MMA or comic books or whatever. But he really went out of his way over the last 7 years to sort of make it clear that this was not his passion. That he is not synonymous with pro wrestling, and I think it has done a lot of things to damage his brand a little bit in pro wrestling. I mean, I think the UFC stuff kind of hurt his brand because part of like kind of the Punk gimmick was that he was so real. He was like, this Muay Thai kickboxer, or so he wanted people to believe. And then you put him in an octagon and he just got destroyed the couple times he did it. I think the stuff with, his whole falling out with Colt Cabana made him look really bad. So I just think this isn't the CM Punk of 2014 and 2015, where he was kind of like the cult hero and all the fans looked up to him so much for standing up to the big corporate machine in WWE. It feels like over the last 7 years, again, I think his brand has taken a little bit of a hit. I think we've heard and seen things from him that have, I don't know, given the impression that this is a guy with a pretty big ego. And I feel like so many times we heard, I'm waiting for somebody to come to me with the right offer. And that's fine. I mean, from a business perspective, that's a smart thing to do. But I haven't gotten the impression that this is a guy who, no pun intended, is all in. And we'll see. And maybe he's not now, and he gets in there, and, the fans go crazy for him, and he's in there against a really young, talented, hungry guy like Darby Allin, then starts to come back to him, because we know that there was a time where that was CM Punk. right? Where he was absolutely all in and in love with the wrestling business. And I think that was kind of, that is almost like the blueprint for the modern wrestler is the young fan who just grew up, fall in love with it, and so committed to it. I mean, that's almost like every headliner, but he was one of those original guys, and again, I think kind of became the blueprint for a lot of those guys, and has moved so far away from that in the last few years that I think it'll be important for he could. I hope he doesn't go out there a little too cavalier, a little too kind of like over it, all of it, and if he does, I don't know that they're going to get the return on the investment. So we'll see.
Well, I kind of think that you take everything you just said, which I agree with, and you use it. I almost feel like that's where his strength lies. In a way, it gives you a way to – you have these two giant names that are mostly, with most fans, affiliated with WWE, CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, coming in very close to each other. And this is how you differentiate them. I mean, Bryan's going to be the sentimental favorite, the guy you can't help but love. This is a guy that just wants to wrestle, and WWE, was not treating him right. He just loves to do it. Like, he'd do it for nothing, whether or not that's true. I mean, like, that's the image of Daniel Bryan, just this incredible hardworking guy. And Punk is the guy who, look, I think they turn him for exactly what you said of like walking in there and going exactly that. Like, I don't really want to be here. I already did it all. But Tony Khan won't leave me alone. Like, he tried to get me 3 years ago. I told him no. The guy won't leave me alone. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to just, basically kick everybody's butt. I'm going to just, I'm a WWE guy. I'm not used to this Bush League stuff, like that kind of thing. You have him do exactly that. And that's what makes him different from Daniel Bryan. And that's what keeps him hot, to my view anyway. Use all that stuff.
As I agree, as a storyline, I think that works. My concern is that that's really him, and if that's really him, I don't know if that affects him. I mean, what's the quality of his performance of matches if a guy is not completely invested? And again, I say this is all completely just sort of like speculating because, in part, because he has been so secretive in the last few years. But again, I one thing that even before all this talk was going on with AEW is. It's been a long time since we've heard CM Punk express his love for wrestling and why he loves it. He doesn't even seem like that much of a fan anymore. Now there was you almost forget about it, but there was the Fox Sports show, the WWE show that he was part of the panel in, and that was kind of his first foray in a long time back into kind of the wrestling space. But even there, I mean, again, I don't know that he ever seemed completely dialed in. If anything, it makes me more concerned about where he's going to be because it did sort of feel like he was there collecting a paycheck. So we'll see.
He was there really, unless I'm mistaken, as a Fox, like he was being paid by Fox. Right. I don't think he was paid by WWE to do that.
Yeah, I actually think that kind of hurt his brand too because he came back with relatively little fanfare. This was the return of CM Punk to, I guess you could debate whether or not it's WWE programming. It was WWE produced. Well, I don't know if it was WWE produced, but, it was a WWE highlight show, and he was on it, and it just stopped feeling like a big deal after a week or two. I think WWE managed it that way on purpose for exactly that reason. They knew he wasn't coming back. They weren't, he wasn't on their payroll. They didn't want to invest all this and make it into a big deal because they knew they would wind up looking bad. So they didn't, Yeah. And some weeks he was there and some weeks he wasn't there. It was just all super kind of anticlimactic. And again, I think also kind of hurt the mystique.
Yeah. He shouldn't have done it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was a paycheck, I imagine. I think and again, the reason he did that, again, kind of goes to this theory. And to him, it was not about working for WWE. It was about working for Fox Sports. And it was about, again, kind of feeling above it all. Now, the other thing that he's involved in is this new Stars series, Heels, which is about pro wrestling. And even that cuts both ways. I wonder how much of this, whatever he's going to be doing with AEW, is essentially a vehicle to promote that. I don't know how much of being around wrestling again through that series, maybe made him fall in love again, kind of reignite that spark. So we'll see. I hope we know that CM Punk, a dialed in, invested, committed CM Punk is fantastic. I mean, really a Hall of Fame talent. Hopefully we get that. And there's also just the reality of him being 7 years older than when he left. And never a guy who was cosmetically in great shape, but conditioning wise could go. So is that conditioning back? We will see. Daniel Bryan to get more up in the air between the two, or are you more confident about one or the other? I think Daniel Bryan could be a huge difference maker, because here's a guy who clearly is as in love with wrestling as anybody.
Yeah, and he's more likely to stick around longer. I think he's more invested. He's more current. He's not, because look, let's face it. It's been 7 years. I mean, like I said last time, Punk's been gone as long as Bob Backlund was gone. And I mean that's true. That's true. Maybe I didn't say it last time. Yeah, Punk. When Backlund came back in late '92, he had been gone because he stuck around even for a few months after Hogan got the belt. He had been gone for maybe a couple of months, literally, like maybe 2 or 3 months longer than Punk has been gone for. And of course, when you're a kid or a teenager, that felt like ancient history, right? It makes you feel old. I mean, they might as well have told me Edge Strangler Lewis is coming back.
Right.
Like I knew who Backlund was. I mean, I knew he was the champion and everything, but it was like, oh my God, that was such a long time ago. So
so much was made of his age. And how old was he at the time?
He was, I think, like 43.
Yeah, wow.
And they were comparing him to George Foreman and all this stuff. But, the difference, of course, there, I mean, to me, there isn't a comparison because, when Backlund had his original run, WWF was a regional company. He wasn't seen all over the country and all over the world. He wasn't, he was known to the fans in the Northeast mainly. It wasn't like a Punk deal where, he was a full-fledged global WWE superstar and fans all over the country and all over several other countries know who he is and remember him. So it's something very different. But I still say Daniel Bryan is, he's the better long-term investment. I feel like there is definitely, as much as it's depressing to say, there's probably a nice chunk of the wrestling audience now that wasn't even really watching yet when Punk was around the last time. And that's not the case with Daniel Bryan, because he was just there. So I feel like, right. There's probably a little bit more of an upside with Bryan. I do. But I think over the long term, I think with Punk, it's going to be a bigger splash to start off with the headlines and the buzz and everything else. But I think when you look back on it a few years from now, it'll probably be Daniel Bryan who you felt had more of an impact, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's interesting that, in on the week that, and I think this is the story, on the week that WWE is getting ready for one of their biggest shows of the year in a giant football stadium with about as big a match as they could possibly put on, featuring two of the biggest stars of the last 20 years. This is what a lot of people are talking about. They're talking about Ric Flair. They're talking about Daniel Bryan. They're talking about CM Punk. They're talking about AEW. Do you think this is registering with Vince McMahon? And how important is it that they get a win here? It really feels like SummerSlam this year is particularly important for them in terms of just creating some buzz.
Yeah, I think this is affecting them a lot more than they let on. I mean, they're really good at that. And Vince is really good at that. Like, they talk constantly about the threat of WCW and the Monday Night War and everything. They talk about it now. But at the time it was happening, they were trying to make them into a joke, too. And they were trying to say they weren't much of a threat and that, our competition is all entertainment. That's what they were saying back then, too, even though behind the scenes they weren't thinking that. And I think that's a lot of what's happening right now. They don't want to give AEW that rub of saying, yes, they're our competition. And I do think there's still a vast divide between the two companies because WWE is much more of this integrated multimedia powerhouse with this kind of cultural cachet that AEW doesn't have. But this is how things change. This is how things begin. There's already stuff I was reading in the Observer about how Warner Media that owns, they don't own AEW, but they own TNT and TBS. they are so impressed with AEW and their performance that they're going to start investing in them and in helping them to transition and cross over and do more multimedia things and do more like TV shows and comic books and products and things to compete with WWE. So this is how these things get started. It really is. So, and I do think, look, I know Vince is getting up there in years, and there's rumors as to how much control he has, but I really believe that he knows the deal. He knows what's going on. All you have to do is look at the wrath of God that has been brought down on NXT in the past few weeks. Yeah. And if you don't know what that is, I mean, that's pretty obvious why that is. Even Triple H himself is not safe from the wrath of God that is coming down right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could talk another hour about that, but it's incredible. Yeah, I mean, you talk about just kind of a vote of no confidence.
Yes.
That's what we've seen in NXT in the last few weeks. And in the meantime, I mean, also touching on what you said about Warner, we saw Rampage debut on Friday. By all accounts, a success, newsworthy. People loved it. You got Christian winning the Impact title.
Awesome show.
Yeah, a fun show. An hour long. You know, we talk about that also, like that kind of the right length for a wrestling show. So not overkill. We see Cody and Brandy getting their own spin-off reality show on TNT. So yeah, I mean, it's very much feeling like this is a big brand. You know, real competition.
This is a transitional moment here. Like this is like a little bit of a turning point that's happening. I feel like, I'm not saying it's irreversible, but it feels like one of those moments that you look back and you go, when did this really become a fight? When did AEW really become a force? And people are going to say right now, right now. Yeah.
And that's why it's interesting. This, SummerSlam, beyond just being, a hot show and a loaded up card, really you could look at as kind of their response to that. And what do they see as their best counter attack? And it's Goldberg, it's Roman Reigns and John Cena. There's some good, some bad there. But you look up and down that card. I mean, there are some prospects that you could be excited about for the future.
It's going to be a very impressive looking show because you've got the giant stadium. This is, believe it or not, this is the first time they have done a stadium for SummerSlam since Wembley in '92.
Yeah.
So, it's going to look really cool. No question.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Well, fun time to be a wrestling fan. Bryan, thanks so much. We always appreciate you joining in here. We'll probably be back after SummerSlam, especially if there's big news coming out of it, to break it all down. Right now, let's throw to my conversation exclusive here on the podcast. You can read more in the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. It is the editor and publisher of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, Dave Meltzer.
What's impressive to me about Tony Khan, and I mean, not everyone is like him, and he's very, obviously he was lucky to have a father like he has, which obviously nobody else could have done it without that kind of a father. It couldn't have been done, but people with a father like that in that same situation, 95 to 99 out of 100 would have bombed, and he didn't. So that's saying something for him. But it's still, it's just thank God, because the greatest thing, and it's funny to me because so many people resent the change, but to me the greatest thing in wrestling is that there's real competition out there. And also, it's like, there's more jobs for wrestlers because of it. There's higher pay for wrestlers because of the competition. It's the great. There's more variety for fans. Fans would always complain, I don't like WWE, I don't like WWE. Well, now you've got, you actually got, thanks to the internet, you have a million alternatives to WWE. If you don't like it, I always will say this: if you don't like wrestling, if you don't, it's like, there's something somewhere for you. If you want to watch shoot style or serious style or whatever, there are companies out there for you. If you look at it, because there's so many companies, and it's not even like before. Well, there's only a few, and I can't watch them on TV. It's like you can watch everybody.
Yeah.
In the push of a button, I can watch Revolution Pro from England. I can watch Progress from England. I can watch WXW from Germany. I can watch, Australia, Melbourne Championship Wrestling from Australia. And I find like things entertain me in every one of those things. I wish I had more time in the day and there was more than 24 hours in a day and I could watch all of the great wrestling that we have all over the world. I feel fortunate because I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I would read about everything, but I couldn't watch everything. And then, you would, when I first started Georgia Championship Wrestling, or I would get the programs from St. Louis, I was like, man, I would have given anything to be able to go to St. Louis or go to Madison Square Garden. Although MSG we actually did start getting to see in the late 70s on cable. But go to St. Louis, go to the Omni in Atlanta, go to the Bayfront in Tampa or Miami Beach, even Portland. There would be these cards and these programs and everything. I go, God, I wish I could see this. I wish I could see this. And you couldn't. And it was like, when I get older, I'm going to have a job and I'm going to go out. I'm going to fly to Atlanta on Friday nights. That's what I thought when I was a kid. It's like by the time I got older, there was no reason. Vince had everything. He was bringing the same stuff to San Francisco that he brought everywhere else, so I didn't need to go anywhere. And WCW, I traveled some for WCW, but it wasn't the same thing as when it was WWF and WCW. That feud, it was really two companies, and then ECW, became the third. But with in the territorial days when you had all these, it was a completely different flavor of wrestling everywhere. The first time I went to Memphis Live, God, it was so fun and so great because they had a completely different attitude towards wrestling. And it was funny because so many people in wrestling always look down on Memphis. It's like, oh, it's bullshit wrestling, blah, blah, blah. And I would watch the TV and I would be highly entertained. And then when I went to the show, it's like, God, these shows are great. I don't know what, everyone's complaining about their action. The fans love them. They get big crowds. This is back when they were doing big crowds. So it's like, if it works, it works. I mean, you go out there, and I was out there once at the Mid-South Coliseum. There's 8,000 people on a Monday night. And it's like, dude, don't cry about this stuff. This stuff works in its territory.
Because you've spent so much of your life watching wrestling, writing about wrestling, do you ever look back and think, where's my life gone kind of thing? And any regret about committing so much of your life to it? Because I imagine that's come at the price of a lot of other things, spending time with your kids or traveling that's not wrestling related or anything else, finding other hobbies or reading books. Or do you look back on all these amazing matches and trips that you've taken and people that you met and say, this was a life well lived?
God, you made me feel old. I do not regret anything. I mean, I regret things I've written and things I've said on rare occasion. But I mean, the life I lived, I have zero regret for the life I've lived. Are there things that if I could script my life, minor changes? Of course, everyone has that. But I felt from the 80s, from the late 80s, certainly, even though I started this in 71, 72. But from the late 80s, I kind of just, when I was growing up, it was like I was always going to be a sports writer, and I thought I was going to be, the big columnist in the local paper. Live in San Jose, I'd be the guy. I'd be, because I had really a lot of interest in all sports. So because of wrestling, I do not follow all sports, so there's a lot that I've given up that I would enjoy. But in the late 80s, I kind of was like, okay, I mean, I didn't choose wrestling. Wrestling chose me, but I'm happy it did. And I don't regret it at all. I've had so many wonderful memories and stories and met fascinating people, and it's an amazing industry. I mean, there's a lot of negativity to it, and there's a lot of stuff like anything. If you're a football writer and you go back and you're the stars from the 70s, and you come in and they have CTE, and these were Kenny Stabler and John Mackey and these guys, right? And you're going back, it's football that caused this, or boxing is even worse. I mean, I know all kinds of older boxing reporters. Ali was a heartbreak, right? He was like the guys of the guy, and then look at how he ended up, and you can't go in there and go, oh, he would have gotten it anyway. It's like, I mean, some people will say that. Oh, there's always people with excuses. We all know boxing did that to him.
Yeah.
And Bockwinkel in wrestling, that was a hard one for me with Nick at the end. Even like in the last week with Terry Funk and Orndorff. I mean, it's a heartbreak, and you have to look back, and it's very, very sad that the repercussions of this, in some cases, can be what they are. It's but as far as like, I don't. I got to do more, write more, success beyond any. If you looked at, like I feel like Jericho, in some ways, where I'll sit there and go like, when I got to do what I wanted to do as a kid, but I was so much more successful at it than I ever thought I would be. I just thought if I could do it, it would be great. And it would have been. It would be great if I just could do it. But I ended up like, being able to do that. And, my kids are, whatever, they're going to be fine forever and things like that. So it's just, it's been good. It's been really good. I mean, as far as, of course you miss out on things. I'm trying not to miss out on as much now, but and I really, but yeah, it's like you can't do, 15 to 17 hours a day, almost all on pro wrestling and MMA, and not miss a lot of stuff. It's just, those are the choices, And
will you pull back? Will you pull back at some point? I mean, short of retiring. Do you think there's a point?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Could you, or do you think? I mean, would you be able to downshift like that, or is the reality, as long as you're doing this, you're going to have to go at it, all in the way?
No. I've already, no. I mean, I mean, wrestling aside from my kids, wrestling was always my priority, and wrestling is my job now, and it is my priority. It's a priority for sure. It's not like I'm going to miss a pay-per-view or anything like that. I'm not going to be out of touch with wrestling, because if I'm not in it to a pretty significant level, it will pass me by, because it passes everyone by.
Right.
I mean, I learned a lesson from Watts, Watts was a freaking genius when it came to wrestling, and he came back, didn't watch it for 5 years, came back, and it was like, I didn't even realize how much the business had changed, because I'd been in it every day. But talking to him, it's like, the business has changed, and it's going to be when he came to WCW. It's like, I knew, man, it's like I was wishing WCW would hire Watts, because he was such a great booker. And then when he came in, it was immediate to me. It's like, he's booking with the idea. It's the mid '80s, and I loved the mid '80s. That's the funny part of it. And some people, will look back at his era and go, I love that, but it didn't work. And there's a reason it didn't work, because it's not the mid '80s anymore. Everyone's got their, if you don't keep up, it's like if you don't keep up, you're not gonna, you won't be able to do it well. Like if I said like, okay, I'm going to take a year off. If I came back, man, it would take me a long time to fully understand. So I can't afford to do that. It's funny because one of the smartest guys I know in wrestling is Mike Tenay. And Mike Tenay has nothing to do with wrestling. He's retired. I mean, I'm not saying he'll never come back because it's wrestling, but and he watches everything, and I talk to him as much as I can. And he's still smart on everything, and I learn something from him as he does from me every time we talk. But it's fascinating to me because we're both. He has no reason to watch everything, but it's like he's devoted his life since he was 11 to learning wrestling, and he's not going to let it pass him by. And I'm not going to let I'm not going to let wrestling pass me by. I mean, it's not going to happen.
But are there some changes? Because I've dealt with this over the last year. Do you see some of the changes in fans' sensibilities and their tastes, and feel so removed from them that you don't want anything to do with it? I mean, the one thing that comes to mind is the stuff with the Fiend, the Firefly Funhouse. I was live tweeting WrestleMania last year, and I remember writing, and I try to be careful with these things. And when the Firefly Funhouse match came up, I thought sort of like, I'm okay here saying this is garbage and everybody will agree with me. And I was just assaulted by fans who loved it
And to me, that was kind of a turning point for me.
There's always going to be.
Well, I don't connect with these people anymore.
I try to learn from them, but you also look, I do a poll every single week on what people like and what people don't like, and if it varies greatly from my opinion, I try to learn from it. And it's like Twitter's a weird one because you're going to get the negativity no matter what. I learned this funny thing. So this has nothing to do with wrestling, but it was like just a lesson that I learned like 2 weeks ago. So I grew up with a girl who's now a woman. She's a couple years younger than me, who is now one of the experts in the world on China. In Biden's cabinet, I think she works with Biden, and all this. Absolutely brilliant woman. Okay. And I, she was back when we were kids too. And I, so anyway, I knew she would be successful at something, but I didn't realize, I had no idea, it's like I never kept up with her. I had no idea what she was doing. And then I'm watching CNN one morning and there she is and she's talking and it's just like, she's over my head. So it's like, okay, I got to find out what she's up to. And then I studied and it's like, oh my God, what an impressive woman, right? Like freaking genius, like genius to a high level genius, not just regular genius. She's genius to a high level. Almost intimidating to me because it's like her books are better reviewed than my writing. And it's just like, I'm not even the best writer on my blog. I thought I was like the best writer in the history of my school and one of the best in the history of my college, because I'm always said that. And here this girl on my blog actually has better reviewed stuff. So it was kind of funny, but the point is that, so I was studying her stuff. And then I would read the reactions, and it was the same kind of reactions I got. And it's like I know, because I know how smart she is, that these people going like, oh, you don't get it, you don't know it, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. It's like I know that she was smart at a level that very few people I've ever met in my life are, and she's getting the same stuff I do. So it kind of really hit home. And I remember DeFord would get the same stuff I get. And DeFord was the greatest sports writer of my life, and I was lucky he was a friend of mine. But he would get, I remember, oh, Frank's senile, Frank's this, Frank's that. He's just wrote a brilliant article, and you're going to call him senile because he's 70? It's just like, so it really hit home. So, like, I like that stuff you're going to get no matter what, and that's not indicative of anything. That's weak people who, that they're just looking for attention or whatever it is, or just, bitter people because they're not successful in life. I mean, that's what most of them are. So you got to look at that way. But I mean, as far as, people are always going to have different tastes, and you try to cater to it. But like, there's stuff like sometimes like where Bryan on the show will go like, oh, I hated this, and I always go like, I didn't like it either, but we got to wait a couple weeks to see like what the stats say, because if they're hitting on something new that we don't like, we got to learn from it. It's like the Heyman line is, what works. We're not here to pretend something that works doesn't work. Okay. If we don't like it, it's like if it works, you try to figure out why it worked. Learn why it worked. Don't try to go, this didn't work when it's obvious it did. I think that's when a lot of I think this came from A4, when a lot of the older promoters were like, you can't have a world champion like Hulk Hogan. He's too big. He only goes 12 minutes or 9 minutes or whatever. Remember all that? I mean, I don't know if you remember that, but that's what people say. But, all the older promoters, like, it's flash in the pan. And I'm going like, people go crazy at his matches. He's drawing big. No, is it my favorite kind of match? Would I rather watch a Ric Flair match? Of course I would, because it's more dramatic, blah, blah, blah. But I can't deny Hulk Hogan is like one of the, greatest, 2 or 3 greatest draws in the history of this entire business, and that it's not working. So learn why it's working, and it's just like in the 1980s, people wanted that superhero babyface. He was perfect for his time. He was exactly, the greatest thing that could have happened, because he freaking carried that company in ways that people today don't understand or perceive, because today they don't, there's nobody like that. You know what I mean? Like even Cena at his peak was never like that. Austin was like that, where if you pull him out, business goes way, way down. When you bring him back, business goes way, way up. Austin was like that. I think Dwayne was like that to a degree, but Hogan was like that. Bruno Sammartino was like that. He was another one. Those guys are people today sometimes like, why didn't they ever beat Bruno in those 8 years? And it's like, you don't get it because, You don't mess with what's working. You know, people now,
Right.
why didn't Orndorff get a win over Hogan? Why didn't they put Orndorff over for the title? And it's like, you know, it's not like it wouldn't have drawn Hogan chasing Orndorff, but the gimmick was that Hogan was this superhero that nobody could beat. And until Warrior came, you know, yeah, they did the Andre thing, but that was because Hogan was doing a movie and they had to get the belt off of him. And then even with Warrior, he was doing a movie then too. But it's like you don't. The whole lure of Hogan is that he's someone that you count on and he always wins. Like with Bruno, all the kids that grew up with Bruno, it's like except for the Ivan Koloff match, you know, for years and years and years, 15 years, he never lost, and that's why he became this mythical hero to a generation of people. You know, because of that booking. You know, if he had been a guy who had won and lost and won and lost and won and lost, yeah, he'd still be remembered as a big star, but not at the level that he's remembered as now.
Yeah. I agree, and I often repeat the thing about if it works, it works. But I also think that sometimes there's limits to that, in as much you could push something too far where it's not even recognizable as wrestling anymore, right? So I said you could go and put on hardcore pornography on your television show, and it's going to draw ratings, right? Because people want to see it. But that's not wrestling. And I thought that some things that we saw over the last year with the cinematic stuff, you know, with Bray Wyatt, with the Firefly Funhouse match, it got to the point where this is just not recognizable as wrestling anymore. But obviously some people disagree. I mean, do you think there's some middle ground there, and can you accept that as the evolution of wrestling?
I mean, if it gets to be the most popular version, I'm going to have to adapt. But
Yeah.
Again, I think Bray Wyatt's a brilliant guy, but I was not a fan of most of his stuff. Occasionally I was, but most of the time, I mean, the Firefly Funhouse itself, some of the skits, I didn't mind those. I didn't love them, but I didn't mind them. But when it got to the real supernatural stuff, I was saying with Lucha Underground, I think that that's a direction there's going to be people who love, but I think that it's also going to turn off a lot of people. Like Lucha Underground, I loved so much about Lucha Underground, but I hated so much about Lucha Underground, and in the end, it never really grew past a certain level, and I think that there was a reason for that, because I don't think that the average wrestling fan wanted 3,000-year-old people and people flying in space and all the stuff that they did that I think worked, you know, against the phenomenal action that they provided that people don't even really talk about because it got so wacky at the end that it's like if something is so wacky, the good stuff is just remembered as part of the wackiness as opposed to the groundbreaking good stuff that, they did deliver in the ring.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I've kept you for like an hour here, Dave. Thank you so much. I won't take any more of your time. You were good enough to invite me to vote in the Hall of Fame a few years ago. So a big fan of yours, your writing, your journalism, and a real honor here to talk to you.
Thanks. I appreciate it.